So I am now joined by a very special recurring guest, friend of the program. It is Wizards and NBA reporter for NBC Sports Washington, Chase Hughes. Chase, it's been a little bit, but I'm glad to have you back on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back on. This is my second time, although I consider it kind of like 2.5 because I'm pretty sure I got Todd Dybus to be on your show. So I think that counts a little bit. I'm sort of a guest booker too at this point.
Yes. Yeah. The royalties and the checks from that are forthcoming, but yeah, that's right. I almost forgot about that. And I've had Ashu on. So I had the old Nats Talk gang on.
Yeah.
I missed that podcast, by the way.
Yeah, I do too, but things always change quickly in this industry. So, and neither guy is with us anymore. So we couldn't do it anymore, right, even if we wanted to.
Do you guys just have like your own Nats Talk podcast, like via like FaceTime?
Well, we still have a group text. Anytime there's a rain delay, Nick tries to rib or, kind of tease Todd about that. And then there, of course, this season in baseball, there was a cat on the field in one game, right? And then Carter Cuban was playing pretty well. So there was a lot of like recurring things you heard on the podcast that we were able to talk about in our group chat.
I think Todd still has PTSD every time he sees the Skittles tart being drug out.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to talk to him about that. But in the Wizards realm, like so much has happened since last season. So like, when you packed up the laptop at the end of their first round exit against the Sixers, like, did you foresee that like the kind of drastic wholesale changes that took place?
Well, first of all, there were so many different steps to this offseason. Our first question was, will Scott Brooks be back? And it took a few weeks and we found out he wasn't going to be back. So then they had to go through the whole coaching search, and then they traded Russell Westbrook for all these players. And then they signed Spencer Dinwiddie. And as the dust sort of settled, I think they did some good things with their team. I think Wes Unseld Jr. has been really impressive so far. Obviously, we haven't seen him coach a game that counts yet, but he's just a really smart guy and is really preaching defense. And I think the team is really responding to him. He's just a really good communicator. And he's been good to cover it from a media perspective because he kind of teaches you a lot about the game. He doesn't kind of sugarcoat anything or put anything in like layman's terms. He'll say the same terminology to you that he does to his assistant coaches and his players. So that's been cool to kind of learn from. And then obviously they added a lot of depth, a lot of defense, a lot of shooting. And I think that they're going to be probably about as good as they were last year, but potentially with a brighter future because of the flexibility that they now have with the salary cap. But we'll see. The Eastern Conference is going to be better. So it was a very, very eventful offseason, but I think they're in pretty good shape now that the dust is settled.
Absolutely. So obviously when you look at the depth chart in the roster now, I think the biggest like change obviously is this no longer Russell Westbrook. And we've had this conversation in the past about like the John Wall out, Russell Westbrook in. There's a lot of hesitation initially when Russ came in. But that guy grew on me. I don't know if he grew on everybody else in Wizards Nation, but like, everybody knows about the negatives, the Russell Westbrook, the poor shooting, all that. But when you watch the guy for the entire season last year, never quit on a play, was in it the entire time. Why do you think he wanted out of DC after just 1 year?
Well, I think he saw an opportunity to join the Lakers. They were looking for a third star, and it's his hometown team, and kind of the stars aligned. No pun intended there. It just kind of happened to be a really good situation for him. And I think, he went through last year, and I think he made the most of it. And obviously they had a pretty successful season relative to previous years. But, getting the 8th seed and falling in the first round of the playoffs isn't really at this point in his career where he wants to be. I think he wants to be competing for rings, and he's still got some of his prime left. I think we all saw that last year, led the league in assists, averaged a triple-double, was like top 5 in the league in rebounds. He had a really good year, and, he may not be at his peak that he was in 2016-17, but he's still in his prime. So I think he can still be one of the best players on a good team, a contending team. And I think he recognized that he's only got so many years left where he can be that type of guy. And the situation arose where he felt like that was the perfect landing spot for him. And he told ownership and the Wizards front office, please get me there. It's been kind of a weird thing where, a lot of really respectable reporters have reported very different things about the nature of that trade request. I reported my own stuff. Tommy Shepard on the record and in hindsight has kind of backed up some of the stuff I put out there. But to be honest, it's really murky. It's like, you have Ramona Shelbourne and Shams and all these people who, they're not like making it up. got very different information based on how hard the trade request was, when it was made, and that sort of thing. But bottom line is he asked out, and whether he was super serious or not, anytime a player, especially if his stature, wants out, generally a team's going to accommodate that, unless your name's Ben Simmons, I guess. So they got him out of here, and I think they did pretty well for themselves with the return they got.
Absolutely. You brought up something that's really interesting. In the scoop game, especially when it comes to like a player in DC, when you have like the Shams and the Wojs that try to get involved and report on the story, like, do you see that happen often where like there's varying reports and it's kind of murky and everything you said, like, does that happen often?
No, I wouldn't say that there's usually that many different stories out there about one guy. And it's probably a product of Russell Westbrook is very, very tight-lipped when it comes to the media. Like, a lot of that stuff wasn't coming from him. It was probably coming from people within the Wizards organization, the Lakers organization. Maybe his agent was talking to people close to him. So when it's not coming from the horse's mouth, then I guess sometimes messages can get mixed up. But I would say that was pretty unusual with the specifics of a trade request and all the differences that came out, whether it was made 2 weeks before the trade or whether it was made the morning of, whether it was made to Tommy Shepard, whether it was a firm one, or whether it was made directly to Ted Leonsis. We kind of heard all sorts of things. And Tommy has kind of insisted that it was, really just about sending him to the Lakers that made that deal make sense, that really there was not any other team that he was really going to go to. So ultimately, at the end of the day, he's in LA, and I guess it's kind of up to fans and readers to figure out what part of the story they believe.
I think another part of that whole Russell Westbrook ordeal was the report that came out not that long ago that said that Russ talked to Bradley Beal and he's like, "Hey man, I think you should jump ship and get out of here." Like, that caught me really off guard, by the way. Like, what did you make of that whole story when you heard it?
Yeah, that was a bizarre twist in all of it, because I didn't really understand what Russell Westbrook's motivation was there. Like, was he trying to get Brad to ask out of Washington and then they would get traded together? Or was he getting Brad to ask out of Washington so that maybe that would trigger a rebuild and then Russ would be able to go out? I don't know what the motivation would be there, unless Brad was going to follow him to another team and they were going to try to build a super team elsewhere. That's the only thing that would really make sense, because otherwise it's like, well, what does it matter to Russell Westbrook, right? But I think the biggest takeaway in that Wizards fans should have is that someone tried to convince someone with a lot of influence around the league and on Bradley Beal, tried to convince him to leave. And once again, Bradley Beal said, "No, I don't want to go anywhere."
Right, because like I know those guys had great chemistry and they seemed like that, they really vibe together on the court. But yeah, just the whole like idea of, hey, let's get out of here. Like, unless it's like a Bonnie and Clyde situation where they go to where they go to the same team and just like super team up. But I think also in that report, he was just like, if he wasn't going to get Brad to leave DC, I think Russ just wanted Brad to like agree that his trade request was valid, or like that, he wanted his blessing or something. I think that's kind of how that went.
Yeah, that may have been part of it. And it seems like Brad did give him his blessing. He wasn't really too worried about it. And I think, now that what was done is done, it's a pretty good situation for Bradley Beal. I think he's got a really strong supporting cast that complements his skills, that kind of fills in the gaps around him with his weaknesses, in defense, and, it should give him more space and eliminate double teams on offense. So I think it's a good situation for Bradley Beal. I do wonder about the ceiling of the team now that Russell Westbrook's gone. We saw them go 17-6 to close the year. I don't know if they could go on that type of run, but I think they can be a playoff team. And if they do, then Bradley Beal's going to get a lot of credit, probably more credit than he's ever gotten before, because I think everyone can look at this roster and see that it's him, and there's a pretty big drop off between him and the second best player.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned the replacement for a lot of these guys on the roster. The replacement for Russell Westbrook is obviously Spencer Dinwiddie. I'm really excited about this guy. I've read a whole bunch of stuff about him on and off the court. I love his playmaking ability. I love the way he drives to the rim. But I think more than anything, I think he's just an interesting person. Have you gotten a chance to talk to him and learn about kind of the whole Spencer Dinwiddie experience?
Yeah, he's a very interesting person. That's for sure. He's super smart. He clearly reads a lot. He clearly pays attention to statistics and advanced numbers and the X's and O's of the game when he breaks it down. I mean, it goes into to a level of depth that, even some of the smarter basketball minds I've been around don't usually delve into. So it's just interesting as someone who wants to learn more about the game to kind of transcribe his quotes and try to figure out what he means, because a lot of it is really high level basketball terminology and discourse. He's a really funny guy. Seems like he's sort of a Renaissance man. He's got his business interests with NFTs and cryptocurrency and all that sort of stuff. And he's just kind of got a good sense of humor. He negotiated his contract on his own with the Wizards and had these interesting provisions. Like if they win a title, then he gets $1 bill. And he said he wants it in 100 pennies. So he definitely, marches to the beat of his own drum. And I think he's going to be a fun guy to cover. And I think especially if he plays well, he's going to be a guy that fans really, really like and really, really take to. Obviously he's coming off a serious injury, the ACL, but he's a really smart player and he's got great size for his position and a great feel for the game. You can't speed him up. He's a good passer. He's really good at getting to the rim. He's a good defender. And I think he's just going to do a really good job of maximizing the offensive firepower around him. So, maybe it's going to take some time for him to reach peak form because he's coming off that injury. But I've been really impressed so far in the preseason with just how well he's played and how well he's moved, coming off that injury. He can get to the rim really well, and he doesn't need to go above the rim to finish because he's got great touch and he can release it from all different angles. And at 6'5", 6'6", it's a really tough shot to block, if you're a 6'2" point guard guarding him. So I think Spencer Dinwiddie so far, the early returns are really good.
I love that. Yeah, everything I've seen about him, he's just such a cerebral player. I was reading one thing. He was on somebody else's podcast, and he had a proposal. He said, if I was commissioner for a day, I don't know if you saw this yet or not, but he said instead of the 2 technical foul ejection, Spencer Dinwiddie said that you should have it where you just lose a player like hockey. So you go 5-on-4 for 2 minutes. I don't know if you've had a chance to process that or what the prospects in your mind are of taking a guy off the court, but that sounds kind of fun.
I wouldn't mind seeing that in some form where it's like there's a rule that results in like a power play kind of thing. It would be really interesting to watch 5-on-4 basketball. You'd obviously have to like play zone if you're the team with 4 men, but I don't know if you could ever get that tied to technicals because I feel like the league has to have a deterrent for technicals, right? It's 2 and then you're ejected, and it's if you get a certain number, then you're suspended a game. I think it's 16, right? So the NBA, and there's fines. It's like $2,000 a technical. So the NBA has all these rules in place because they don't want the optics of, NBA players screaming at refs or any contact between players and refs. So I think the NBA is always going to try to hold true to that. But the idea of a power play does intrigue me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shake the game up a little bit. Spencer Dinwiddie for commissioner after his playing career is over. I'm going to keep that on the back burner. One of the things I remember we talked about you last time was just how all these internet prognosticators always get depth charts wrong. Like they always have guys like out of position, and it's never what ends up being the case before the season. But I wanted to get your take. And there's so much new depth, and given what you've seen in the preseason games, like what do you think is a lineup you would feel comfortable like talking about, and like who do you think would be kind of like the first off the bench situation?
Well, I think ideally if they had everyone available, the starting lineup would be Spencer Dinwiddie, Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, Rui Hachimura, and Daniel Gafford. Now, right now, Rui Hachimura isn't with the team. He's going to join them very soon. He's in DC. He's got to go through COVID protocol after spending several weeks away from the team due to personal reasons. I think that's the best starting 5 because then you would have the first guys off the bench would be KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He could be your backup 2 or your backup 3. If he's your starting 3 and Kuzma's coming off the bench, then I worry about the depth behind Bradley Beal. So there's some domino effects here, right? And if Gafford's the starting center, then you could have Montrezl Harrell come off the bench at the 5. And he was the 6th man of the year 2 years ago. And if you look at the last 2 seasons, he's got the 2nd most 20-point games off the bench. So he's really good off the bench. He's an energy guy. He scores really efficiently around the rim. And he's a pretty decent shot blocker, obviously not good enough to stay on the court in LA last year with the number 1 defense in the NBA, but he's also a pretty good rebounder. He's good at boxing out. He does the little things. So I think he's the perfect like energy guy and scorer to bring off the bench. And then, a lot of guys just fall into their roles. Raul Neto and Aaron Holiday, your backup point guards. Davis Bertans and Denny Avdia can be your backup forwards. And of course, you got Harrell at the 5. And then Corey Kissbert, I'm not really sure where he fits in yet. I think he's going to have to play his way into the rotation. But talking through it, that's how I would kind of see the starting lineup and then the first guys off the bench.
Yeah, when I look at the everybody they have on the roster, it just seems like they have a lot of guys at the same position. They feel really wing heavy. Has Wes Unseld Jr. or anybody else talked about like how they see the minutes playing out? Because you have Denny Avdia coming back off injury. Obviously, they just drafted Corey Kissbert. All these guys kind of play the same positions, and I'm wondering how they all kind of figure out how to work them in this year.
Well, so far, I think everybody's described it as a good problem to have. If you have too much talent, then it's up to the coaching staff to sort that out. And they'd rather have that than not enough talent. We saw last year with the injuries, how that played a role. One thing I would say is that wings are probably the one position that you can't have too many of because they are the most versatile players offensively and defensively. Some of these guys can swing from the 3 to the 4. Some can swing from the 3 to the 2. Some could even maybe play the 5, like, Kyle Kuzma, if you want to consider him a 3, he could play the 5. But I would also say, like, I feel like we've been in this position before to a lesser degree, and injuries always like sort things out, right? Like, sure, yeah, if the team's healthy entirely, then there's going to be some tough decisions to make. And, maybe some guys who are used to playing will have to be out of the rotation, maybe for brief periods, maybe for extended periods. But injuries are going to happen, and the likelihood is that they're going to sort this out naturally. Someone's going to go down for a month or two, and then everything will fall into place. Maybe it's 2 players get hurt, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, thankfully we had that depth because we can sort of withstand the absences. So I think what the Wizards are doing is they're overloading to a certain degree in some areas. Maybe you could say at wing and in center, because they have been so affected by injuries over time, but especially in recent years. And they're just like, all right, we're going to do whatever we can to withstand injuries. And I think they're in good shape, knock on wood. If they have 1, 2, maybe 3 injuries, like they can still roll out a good rotation. But as we've seen, sometimes you have to deal with even more injuries than that.
That's such a great point about injuries. Like rarely does everybody stay completely healthy for the entire year. One guy I did want to get your take on though was Denny Avdia. Like fans last year were clamoring that Scott Brooks was using him in like a wrong role. Like he came into this league as kind of like a point forward, kind of needs the ball in his hands. And then they were always mad at Scott Brooks when he was like a 3-and-D out on the wing, like spotting up for shots. Has anybody talked about the different role that we may see Denny Avdia in this season? And I just want to see him with the ball in his hands a little more.
Yeah, he's going to have a different role. They're going to try to make him more of a primary, secondary playmaker in that second unit. So he was a starter last year for a lot of his games, and he just kind of got relegated to being a spot-up shooter, right? Because he had to play with Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal. I think his ideal role is in that second unit right now. And then what he can do is when he's playing with a point guard like Howell Neto or Aaron Holiday, sometimes they can run the offense through him because it's not Dinwiddie, it's not Beal, it's not someone that you like have to find shots for. He's a really, really gifted ball handler and passer for his size. It's 6'9". Seeing him walk around some of these players, he's taller than I thought he was. I covered him on Zoom last year. I didn't really see him in person. And I think in his shooting, the Wizards like what they've seen from his shooting so far. And in the preseason, we've only seen small glimpses of it. Obviously, he started a little bit slow because of his ankle injury, but there's some high hopes within that organization. The other day I was talking to a member of the Wizards front office and they said unprompted, like Denny Avdia is going to have a big year. And that kind of stood out to me because I've seen him in some drills and practice and they're kind of bringing him along. They're easing him in, as they said. And I saw him kind of have some trouble in some 3-on-3 against, some guys that are probably going to be in the G League. So I saw that and I was kind of like, I don't know, I'm going to cut the guy some slack. But hearing what I heard from the front office executive and then also what Wes Unseld has said about him and other players have said about him, I think there's a lot of excitement about Denny Avdia. And I think the new role is going to do give him a much better opportunity to show off his strengths.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think somebody said that 6'9" point forwards don't just like fall out of a tree. But yeah, when you look at this guy's usage rate last year, it was terrible. It was like 10%. It was behind guys like Anthony Gill. But do you see that this is a trend without Russell Westbrook, having more opportunities being opened up for guys like Denny Avdia to, have the ball in their hands and create more shots that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the Wizards are doing, and it's not just Russell Westbrook, pivoting also away from John Wall, kind of that ball dominant point guard who's making a ton of money and who has a track record and, an ego that comes along with it. And, sort of you have to run the offense through them, and neither guy were really high efficiency guys. So I think they tried to go away from that strategy in two ways. And one would be to take that Supermax contract and sort of spread the wealth around their roster so they can have more depth and just more veterans and more mid-level contracts. But also they want to share the ball a lot more, and they want more ball movement. And I think that's easier to have when you have a point guard who doesn't need to take, 18, 19 shots a game. Spencer Dinwiddie was a 20-point scorer before his ACL injury, but he's not going to be a high usage guy to the degree that Russell Westbrook or John Wall were. So I think they want to pass the ball a lot. I think they don't even want Bradley Beal to be a primary playmaker. I think they want him to play off the ball more, come off screens, kind of like what he used to, get more catch and shoot opportunities, not have to create on his own off the dribble. So it's going to be a lot more of a democratic, sort of equally shared offense. And I think that could bode well certainly for guys like Deni Avdija, who will have more opportunities to touch the ball. And we've seen it a little bit in the preseason where they've made kind of the extra pass, and it's a lot easier said than done. Once you get in the regular season, you're going to have to make sure you move the ball, but that is certainly their intent.
I love it. I did want to touch on the draft really quickly. When it comes to the Wizards in the NBA draft, have you considered at all spending any time in Spokane, Washington, up in Gonzaga? Because that's almost certainly where the next pick is going to come from.
Well, hey, maybe it's Chet Holmgren if things go really, really wrong this year. He looks like he might be a top pick, if not a top 3 pick. But yeah, that's been a thing. I mean, Rui Hachimura and Corey Kissbert are very close to reuniting. Former teammates, of course, with Mark Few's program and in Gonzaga. And yeah, I mean, those guys, I think Corey Kissbert is going to take to the NBA pretty quickly, just like Rui Hachimura did. Those guys are well coached up there. He played 4 years. His shooting ability, I think, is going to be able to shine through. And who knows? Look, I think the Wizards are going to make the playoffs, but there's a lot of predictors out there, prediction models that don't have them making the playoffs. So if they're in the lottery, Gonzaga is going to be really good. So maybe there will be another Zag coming through here.
I love it. You can pencil them in. It's like death taxes, a Gonzaga player in the first round by the Wizards. I love Corey Kissbert, by the way. I love that pick. I thought it was such a great value. Are the reports coming out of camp? I've heard he's just had an awesome camp, and people are raving about not just like his 40% 3-point shooting, but like his ability to cut to the basket. Like, what can we expect from Corey Kissbert?
Well, I think expectations initially should be, pretty low, kept in check. It's going to take him some time, as a rookie. Even though he played 4 years, you can go back and look at some of the best shooters in the NBA. And a lot of guys didn't immediately start knocking down threes because you got to adjust to NBA defenses. And it's a further out 3-point line. But so far, he's had a really impressive camp. He started the first game when KCP wasn't there. And Wes Unseld Jr. said it was in part because he just had played great so far in training camp. And his cutting ability, they really like how he understands spacing. He's a shooter, but he's good with catch and goes. He's good at driving angles and cutting angles. And it's just, it's a product of him being well coached and spending 4 years at Gonzaga and playing with a lot of other good players. That's going to take some time, though, I think, for him to build some chemistry. He's got to learn when to cut, who to cut with. Other players have to know when he's going to cut and that sort of thing. But I think that the upside's there. He was a really good shooter who shot a high percentage with volume and over a large sample size in college. And, indications are that he's, working really, really hard. Anthony Gill is kind of widely known as the hardest working player on the Wizards. And the other day he talked to us and said that he was doing extra conditioning drills after practice one day, and Corey Kissbert came up and was like, "Hey, I want to be involved in this." So he's perceptive. That tells me that he's perceptive. He's smart. He knows how to listen to, who to listen to, and he wants to go the extra mile to be a good NBA player.
All right, a couple more here, then I'll let you go. I want to get an official prediction from you, Chase. You may have given it a little bit before and hinted at it, but I mean, my stance has always been middle of the pack, even though the Eastern Conference is very, very good. I know 4-5-ish. Like, what are we thinking here for the Wizards this year?
I'm going to predict they'll be the 8th seed, but I think they'll go 41-41 and be the 8th seed. So that would be a pretty big, another decent step forward, to have a 500 record. And even though they would be the 8th seed, it'd be in a better Eastern Conference. It'd be with a better record. and with a lot more flexibility in their salary cap, and I think more tradable assets. What about you? What's your prediction?
I always say, like, there's a lot of things we just talked about. You can pencil in. It's always like the Indiana Pacers will always be like the 4 or the 5. I think the Wizards are going to kind of creep up into that territory every year. And I love like the Kuzma, the depth. There's just so much that, I think the Wizards have done right this offseason that not enough people are talking about. I don't know if it feels that way to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I don't want to tell anyone how to bet, but I think like a lot of the over-unders are pretty low for them. Like, I think PointsBet is our partner at NBC Sports. I think they have like 33.5 or like 34.5 wins. Like, I think they could be a 500 team. A best case scenario, maybe they get like the 6th seed or something, but that top layer of the Eastern Conference is just going to be tough for them to crack, I think. Although I wouldn't be surprised based on their depth and their defense if they surprised in the regular season and then just kind of, the lack of superstar power became an issue more so in the playoffs once they got into a playoff series with one of these teams. But certainly, it's going to be tough to keep up with teams like Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Philly, even as dysfunctional as they are, that they're still was the top team in the Eastern Conference last year. Boston, Atlanta, Miami, New York. It's going to be tough, I think, to enter that conversation, but I think the Wizards could be more than a play-in tournament team and an actual playoff team.
Who do you like better to win the Eastern Conference, Brooklyn or Milwaukee?
Right now, I'll say Milwaukee with the Kyrie Irving situation, because it doesn't look like he's going to be playing at all. Not even just home games, not at all. And Milwaukee riding high after that title win, I think that's going to give them a boost. I think they've got good depth. They're well coached. Giannis, I think everyone can see it. The league is kind of becoming his, and I think there's like more levels that they can reach. And I think they're going to have the top seed in the East.
I love it. All right. Last question. So anybody who follows you on Twitter, they've seen your pinned tweet. I'm sure they've read the article by now. It was your interview with Alex Rodriguez when him and Bradley Beal almost bought the New York Mets. First of all, like, what was that experience like? Because, A-Rod's kind of had like the A-Rod renaissance after his playing career and everybody loves him. But like, what was your experience actually getting to talk to him for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was really cool. Like, I interviewed Bradley Beal during the All-Star break, and it was like months after a news story broke that he tried to buy the Mets with A-Rod and J-Lo. So I was like, no one's asked him about this. I'm going to ask him about it. So I got Bradley Beal on it, and I was like, I could just write this story as is, but why don't I try to get the other side of this? I'm going to reach out to Alex Rodriguez. So I reached out to like his company, like A-Rod Corp, and much to my surprise, they granted me the interview, and it was great. And I talked to him on Zoom, and he was a super nice guy. I didn't really have much small talk. I was kind of like, all right, this is a big shot. I'm not going to waste any of his time, but I kind of in hindsight wish I, offered up a question that wasn't Bradley Beal related, but he was great. He was super nice. He was gracious with his time. It was a tough time for him too. It was like during the whole breakup with Jennifer Lopez.
You got him during the breakup?
Yeah. So it was like, I interviewed him when like everyone wanted to talk to him, but of course I didn't ask him about that. So I think he appreciated the conversation, just talking about business and all that. And I will say I was a little starstruck as someone who doesn't happen to me very often, because I, am fortunate to be around a lot of, really cool athletes and really accomplished people. But yeah, getting on Zoom, it was, him saying my name. It's like, yeah, I'm talking to A-Rod right now.
Absolutely. I wouldn't even know what to do. Cause like I said, like after, when he's playing for the Yankees, everybody hated him. He was kissing the mirror. He was doing weird photo shoots and stuff, but now he's like everywhere and everybody loves him. So yeah, I can imagine that, like, he's on Shark Tank. He's doing all this fun stuff. The breakup thing, that is all time bad timing. Did he seem off, or did he seem just kind of like, all right, let's get down to business?
No, he didn't seem off. And it's funny because I think he was like in the Dominican Republic or something. Like, she was shooting a movie in a Caribbean country, and I think he was down there like trying to mend fences and like kind of save the relationship. So he took time away from that to talk to me, which was cool. But speaking of her, he told a story during the interview, which we were able to play on, the pre and post game show. It was really cool at NBC Sports. But during the interview, he was talking about a trip he went. He's like, yeah, I took Jennifer, and he just like kept going on. And I just thought that was such like a boss move to just like mention your spouse or your partner just by their first name, but like the whole world knows who you're talking about.
I'm team A-Rod on that. Anytime I see Ben Affleck pop up, I just want to boo him. So
I agree.
yeah.
I'm a bigger fan of A-Rod than Ben Affleck after seeing what Ben Affleck did to the Batman franchise after Christian Bale.
It's reprehensible. So yeah, anytime I see Ben and Jennifer out there doing stuff, I just want to, express my displeasure. But this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming back on. When does the Wizards season officially kick off? Isn't it the 20th?
Yeah, it's the 20th. They're playing at the Toronto Raptors. So not a very easy start to the season. I know the Raptors didn't make the playoffs last year, but they're super talented. That's not going to be an easy one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Check them out. NBC Sports Washington, Chase Hughes, you're the man. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. We'll have to do this again. And next time, maybe we can talk some Nats too.
Oh, yeah. Carter Keyboom. Are we still riding with Carter Keyboom?
Oh, man. There's some cracks in the armor there. I thought this past year that it was like, I was feeling pretty good about myself and my prediction when he first started getting a lot of hits, but then that OPS sank below, I think 700 or something by the end of the year. And I don't know, the opportunity was there and I can't say he capitalized on it.
Well, I'll tell you the one reason we can all get on the Carter Keyboom train is I think he has like a hard seltzer out, and I think he has like a peach hard seltzer that he has his like name, image, likeness on the can. So if you drink enough of those, I think Carter Keyboom will look like a star third baseman.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm kind of getting, I guess, more excited about Josiah Gray and Keyber Ruiz and those guys.
I love it.